Right, so everyone for joining us on the recording. We're joined with Lisa today, who's going to be talking to us about business exit. So yeah, thanks for doing this for us, Lisa. I know we've been talking about it for a while, but we finally cracked on with it and got it done. So yeah, how's things with you? What you've been up to recently?
Yeah, really busy.
Yeah.
So the whole idea was for me to exit the mortgage business and spend a year or so traveling and things like that. And unfortunately, Ash is a slave driver. And been working with Ash on various things and projects and stuff, and getting all this sort of social media and that type of thing going. And then some other projects that we're working on in the background. So
I didn't realise you were working with Ash.
Yeah. So very much out the frying pan into the fire, really. So I was meant to be. The crazy thing is I've got all these holidays booked, so I'm lurching from holiday to holiday, which is no bad thing. But in the meantime, in the middle, I'm having to cram in, 20 full-time businesses. So it's definitely a work hard, play hard mentality at the moment.
You seem to be getting some traction though, don't you, on digital, on social, on like TikTok. I see that you're getting some good views on that, and YouTube as well. You're cracking on with that. Yeah.
So across the sort of all the platforms, we're doing really well. So I just had one really short video go viral on TikTok, and that was it. Your followers just go through the roof.
Yeah.
So all I mentioned was
that one, doesn't it?
Yeah, all I mentioned was you could use your right to buy discount towards your mortgage, and you deposit, and that was it. It just went absolutely crazy. So I think we're up to about 750,000 views on that one there.
Jesus.
Yeah, so it's that one went a bit crazy, and then because it keeps pushing it out, it just more and more people see you, so you get more and more members. So
right, so it's constantly pushing it out, is it? It's like a long-term serving you on the
yeah, the way that TikTok works is it pushes it out to an audience. People, the algorithms pushes it out to people that it thinks would be interested in your video. If it gets take up and people watches the video, it pushes it out more and more.
Yeah.
And then the more people that watch it, it continues to push it out, because it says, oh, we've got one here that people want to watch. If people stop watching it at a certain point, it pulls you back, and it literally is like falling off a cliff.
Yeah.
And then we've had old videos that for all of a sudden, it might be that somebody's passed a comment and it's brought it back to the top, or the TikTok algorithm has sort of said, oh, we've got another popular one here. So we've got old videos that might have had a couple of hundred views that all of a sudden are showing 20,000 views or 50,000 views, and we're like, how did that happen? And they might be old ones.
And then
exactly, yeah. So it's quite clever the way it just keeps saying, oh, this one's of interest, we'll keep pushing it out, and then as soon as people stop taking an interest in it, it just literally falls off a cliff. So it's quite interesting, whereas all the other platforms are very reactive. TikTok's quite proactive in the way that it works. So it's really interesting watching how they all work. Like Instagram still
it gets harder and harder on Instagram.
Yeah,
well, saying that, the reels are quite good, aren't they?
We put a lot of sort of multi-purpose, the TikTok videos onto the YouTube shorts now, and then the reels, and so you can get on lots of different platforms using all of the different sort of methods and that. But Instagram, it's a weird world. You get so many unfollows on Instagram. You're constantly sort of chasing your tail, and you'll put something up and you think, what exactly offended you about that post?
Yeah.
That all of a sudden, you've decided not to follow me or whatever. So, but you get an awful lot of unfollow on Instagram as well, which you don't really get anywhere else. So so you get a lot of that there, but Instagram is weird. I still do it, and it creates a lot of content, and you're sort of building up your following and that type of thing. And what I like with Instagram is the ability to sort of tag other companies and things like that you don't get so much anywhere else.
Yeah, true.
But
like you say, that's the key to kind of just like multi-purpose your content, and then you're not even having to work any harder for it. You can just
exactly
the same dimensions, isn't it, on TikTok and Reels and YouTube Shorts. So
Yeah. And my Instagram, I sort of sit and write my Instagram posts and do my little Canva images and photos and stuff of an evening just while I'm sat on the sofa. And then everything I put on Instagram, I also put on my Facebook page. Exactly the same. And then I use, because they're like quite short little tips or anecdotes or whatever, they make really good TikToks. So I literally just sit there with my phone and read my Instagrams as my TikToks. So
that's
again,
all about being clever.
and then you swing those back to Instagram and they're a reel or a YouTube short. So,
makes sense.
Well,
it's going well for you then. But
thank you.
So what have you got for us then, Lisa?
Okay, so this is I'm still in the midst of all of this, so it's very much a learning curve for me, but I've been, and I mentioned this to Ash as well, I am so keen to get some of these messages across to other mortgage brokers, because I've been in business for myself for 23 years now. I've been a mortgage broker for 13 years. I would regard myself as fairly savvy business-wise, and this whole closing a business thing has taken me by complete surprise. It really has. And like I say, I would regard myself as being fairly savvy. And it's, if most mortgage brokers, we live day to day, if we have any planning, a month or two in advance, we're probably doing quite well, let alone be thinking about something that's quite far down the road and thinking about your exit. And the irony is that as a mortgage broker and as a property investor, because that's sort of really my background, is the amount of times, it's a classic problem solving thing, which is what mortgage broker is all about. That's why I love property. That's why I love being a mortgage broker. It's about solving problems. And ironically, I was a forensic scientist before that, and that's all about solving problems. And my favorite game as a kid was Cluedo. So the clues are there, as it were. So I love solving problems. And one of the things that I say all the time, and I guarantee every mortgage broker has said this many, many times, is begin with the end in mind. Yeah. Where do you want to end up? And then I can tell you how to get there. Yeah. And the irony is until I came to think about selling or closing my business, I'd never thought about it. Okay.
Most businesses don't. I think the big like Amazon, they forecast like 10 at least 10 years ahead, and that's kind of, these big businesses have that in mind. But like you say, I think the smaller people just don't have that. The smaller businesses just don't have that.
Even if you think about planning for the future, most people are probably thinking about planning for growth, and that how many people plan for winding down their business or for closing their business? Probably very, very few. And again, even as like property investors, you see people planning for, how can I get the kids to inherit the properties? How can I, get the kids onto my company and all of this sort of stuff. So we think of estate planning with properties and that, but it's interesting because, as we all know, as mortgage brokers, so many people have gone into the limited company space in the last few years because of the mortgage interest relief. But how many of those people have actually thought about closing that company or selling it if they need to? And particularly if they don't have kids, or as happened with our kids, my stepkids, but regard them as mine, they basically said, don't you dare leave us a portfolio of properties. That was the last thing that they wanted. So you've got these people setting up these companies, and as well as mortgage brokers have, typically got a company. And I don't think hardly any of them have given any consideration to closing a company down. So what I'm going to go through, hopefully, will not only help the mortgage brokers here think about closing their business or any other business that they've got, but also help them educate their clients a little bit with the ones that are setting up limited companies and asking them if they've actually considered how they're going to close it. And also the mortgage brokers thinking, well, what I'm about to tell you might impact how you might need to close your company later. So I hope that some of the stuff that I'm going to cover is relevant to mortgage brokers in the advice that they give, but also for their own businesses as well. So but it's been a very eye-opening exercise, so much so that I've actually changed what I first intended to do. So and in fact it's changed several times. So do you want to sort of carry on and explain Anybody got any questions so far? And just fire away, by the way, if you've got a question, just stick your mic on and fire away, or put your hand up. Basically, I set up my mortgage business 13 years ago, and I used a limited company that I'd already got. So we were doing property trades in that limited company. The credit crunch hit 2009, 2010. We weren't doing property trading then, decided to become a mortgage broker. So as I'd already got this established limited company, we just changed the trading codes on it, the SIP codes, and just became a mortgage company instead at that point. So my company's been actually going for about 22 years as a limited company and 13 as a mortgage brokerage. Never had any ideas about how I was going to close it or get out of the business or whatever. And then about 5 years ago, me and my husband really started to get the travel bug. We've always loved traveling, but really started to get a big travel bug. So a lot of our thoughts were about traveling a lot more and what we were going to do with a mortgage brokerage that needed my time and energy when we wanted to travel a lot more. So we started thinking about how we were going to effectively get rid of the company. Were we just going to wind it down? Was I just going to stop doing mortgages one day? And I'd got a couple of advisors, so we spoke to them about if they wanted to take over the business at some point. So that was what we decided to do, was to put in place an action plan, 5-year action plan for them to take over the business. So that's what we set about doing. It worked out well for everybody because they're obviously incentivized to stay in the business and to see the best of it because they're going to take it over. I was incentivized to make sure that there's a business there that is worthy of them taking it over, otherwise they're going to clear off and not give me the plan that I want. So it was a really good way of having an exit plan. So if any of the advisors sort of listening in have got staff or advisors, then that's something to perhaps have a think about and maybe a discussion over if that's an option, because it's a real win-win for all the parties involved. And you get a lot of commitment from both sides doing that type of thing. So that was what we set about doing. That was what was going to be the plan. And then, so the idea was once they were going to take over the business, they would effectively take all of the brand and the telephone numbers and the email addresses and the website and all of that type of thing. And then I would close the limited company. So they would have their own limited company, take everything over. I would close the limited company. Now, the reason behind doing that was, one, I didn't really need my limited company anymore. Secondly, how many people here think when it says limited liability company, a limited company, that once you've closed it, that's it? That's the whole point why we all say do it through a limited company, because if you have any problems or somebody comes after you, you've closed your company and it's gone. Okay, bullshit. Right, that is not the case at all, as I have discovered. So basically, if you were to close your company down and then get a complaint, which, let's face it, in this industry is probably more common than most industries, your company can be forced to effectively reopen for at least 6 years and potentially even longer. So the 6 years is pretty much automatic, okay? That if somebody came back within the 6-year period, your company could be reopened without any argument. Beyond the 6 years, effectively somebody would have to prove that you were A, liable, and B, effectively close the company to try and get out of your debts or a claim or something like that, and they had a claim. So after 6 years, they'd probably have to take you to court to try and get it opened again and to make a claim against you. But within the 6 years, it's pretty much automatic. So this whole, and don't forget, this isn't just mortgage brokers, this is anybody with a limited company. The whole limited liability thing, as I say, it's just complete bullshit.
Literally, just within this week, I've set mine up as limited. It's just literally gone through. So this is all like good for me as
But-
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. That was what you were talking about, Dan, isn't it? And I was speaking to Lisa about this before about the limited, because it was all happening, wasn't it?
Yeah. And it's the thing is I still think it's better than having been a sole trader or a partnership, because everything's tied within the limited company. So if they were to sue you as a limited company and the company has no assets, then there's not much they're going to be able to come after, unless you as directors were deemed to have made a mistake or to have been deliberate in withholding anything or whatever, you know, and personally liable. So there is still benefit from having the shell of the limited company, whereas if you were a sole trader, yeah, you've got a tax issue, a tax benefit as well.
Yeah.
But if you were a sole trader, then all of your assets are up for grabs, basically. Yeah. So there's still benefit to have the shell of a limited company. But anybody who thinks that effectively, oh shit, if I got sued or whatever, I'll just close it and that's it, they can't come after me. Or when you've closed your business deliberately to say, right, that's it, I'm out of the industry, just don't think that basically that's it, nobody can come after you and you're now safe.
It does make sense, to be fair, though, doesn't it, from a consumer perspective?
Well, that's the thing, is that, you know, we collectively are not all honest, genuine mortgage brokers. There are some dodgy people out there, and if there was the ability to just scam people, rip them off and close your company and keep doing it, then, you know, as you say, it's not good for the consumer. But the important thing is to point out that a limited company isn't that limited liability that people might think it is. So that's the first thing to say. The other thing off the back of that is, let's just say you've closed your company, and I'll explain about the different ways of closing your company and taking money out of it. So let's say you've closed your company in whatever way, and you've took 100 grand out of it. So you've got your pot of money left, you've got 100 grand and you've took it. If during that 6 years somebody comes back and makes a complaint and they win, then it would be deemed that the money that you took out of the company could have been used to pay that complaint, to settle that complaint. Okay, so that money that you took out of the business isn't really yours until at least the 6 years is up. Okay, because if there was a complaint, they can come back. Yeah, Simon?
Can you just keep your indemnity insurance going?
Right, okay. So this is another interesting one. So you can get runoff insurance. So again, sorry if I'm teaching anybody to suck eggs, but it's just sort of like putting everything out there, really. So when you have PI, your policy only pays for claims in that year. Okay, it doesn't pay for business you've written in that year. It only pays for claims in that year. So if I wrote 50 mortgages and pieces of insurance during 2022, and then I've paid for my PI during this year, that's only covering me from my retroactive date that's stated on your policy. Yeah, but for business I've written from that retroactive date, but only claims that are made during this year. So if I was to close my business this year, the end of 2022, and then not take out a new insurance policy, and somebody comes back to me with a complaint in January, I can't claim on previous policies because they only covered me for that year. Okay?
Well, but if you keep paying it for 6 years,
yeah. So you have to then
some
get
sort of indemnity insurance.
You have to get runoff insurance.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't get a normal PI policy because you're not operating. Okay. So you have to get runoff insurance. Now, the thing is that, as you probably have all experienced, PI has been an absolute nightmare in the last year or so to get PI renewal. So firstly, a lot of the PI companies will not offer runoff insurance, full stop. So firstly, you've got to actually get it. You can't just get a renewed PI cover. You've got to get runoff insurance because you're not operating. Now, I insure through Roger Crowther, a PI desk, okay? And I've asked him about runoff insurance. And he said, because he underwrites his own insurance, he has said, yes, I'm happy to provide you with runoff. The cost of that runoff is exactly the same as my PI insurance per year. Okay, so if I wanted to carry on for 6 years and my PI was over £5,000, okay, so I would have to be paying that every year till I decide the risk of a complaint has gone. However, if I no longer have a business, I have nothing to offset it against. So if you want to get PI runoff, you are paying for it from your own pocket. Yeah, because you have no business to offset it against. So that's where yes, you can get insurance to continue to cover you, but if you're paying 5, 10 or even more, it is coming out of your personal pocket, and that's where you have to make a decision as to what the risks are of continuing with it or not. Okay, so that's the sort of issue with getting PI. So there's no, interestingly, when you leave, I'll come on to the FCA in a minute, but when you leave, the FCA actually asks you if you have insurance, runoff insurance. And there's actually no requirement to have it. So you don't have to, it's just a personal decision as to whether you feel you need to and what the risk of a complaint is. So, so that's the, so when you want to close your business, effectively you've got 3 options. One is to sell it. So that would be selling the box, as it were, the limited company and everything within it. And if you do that, any liability that was on the company would go to the new owner. So flip side of that is if you look to buy somebody else's company or mortgage brokerage or insurance brokerage, if you buy it lock, stock and barrel, limited company with everything that's in it, you're taking on their liability for any previous complaints. Okay.
That's something that a lot of people won't think of at first hand.
Yeah, exactly. So so selling the business as a box with everything with it, most people aren't interested or haven't considered it, that they're actually taking on that liability as well. So if you can't or don't want to sell the company, then you have only 2 options to close a limited company. One is to strike it off. You can only do that if the business has less than £25,000 worth of assets. So if you have premises in there, or you have debtors or pipeline business, or your income that's in it and it's over 25 grand, you cannot strike off a business. Okay. Now, your only other option, and this is what took me by surprise, is a members voluntary liquidation. Now, our intention was, as I say, was to sell the brand, the website, all of that lot, and then close the limited company. And the reason why we were doing that was we would get entrepreneurs relief. So do you know about entrepreneurs relief, any of you? So what entrepreneurs relief is if you have a trading business and it can't hold any assets for investment purposes. So this is why, as a property investor and a mortgage broker, I always say to people, do your trading for property in a separate company to your investments, because as soon as you have an investment in there, you lose entrepreneurs relief. Whereas if you have a trading company of any type, you can get entrepreneurs relief. Now, what that means is once the business closes and you've paid off all your debts and everything else, and then you pull out your asset or your money from the business, you pay only 10% tax on it. Okay, which compared to drawing it out for dividends, for example, so a higher rate dividends is 33.75 this year for a higher rate taxpayer. So it's a massive saving, 24% nearly in tax to get entrepreneurs relief. So we were going down that route to pull out all the money out of the business, just pay the 10% tax once everything else is paid for, happy days. However, there's more money than 25 grand, which means we can't strike it off, which means we have to go for a members voluntary liquidation. This is where it all took me by surprise and got very, very messy. So the first thing is that you have to appoint an insolvency practitioner. Now, even though your business is solvent, so assume your business is solvent, let's say you've got £1 million sat in your business that you want to pull out, okay? That is very, very solvent, not where the Companies House rules are concerned. You have to appoint an insolvency practitioner. The first thing that happens is on Companies House. So, you've got your tabs on Companies House, where your accounts are and who the people are and all of this lot. We'll have all looked at clients' Companies House listings. You then get another tab that says insolvency. Okay, even though your business is solvent. And on there, it lists who your insolvency practitioner is. It says to get in touch with them if you believe that you're owed money by whoever your company is, all of this lot. And then, so that's very public. It says when the company's gone into insolvency, who the practitioner is and everything. And then as you start to go through the documentation, it all gets put onto Companies House publicly for everybody to see. Now, with our accounts, we all know that you can do like abridged accounts. And if you've got a clever accountant, it can almost tell you pretty much nothing at all, because we've all got frustrated seeing clients' company accounts and going, that tells me bugger all. Not so with an insolvency. Everything is public and everything is on the Companies House page for everybody to see. Including what is one of the most important documents in the whole thing, is called a declaration of affairs, and it is a really, really serious document in company terms. And it is a declaration of everybody that you owe money to, any assets that you own, any profits that are in the business, anybody that owes you money, everything, down to you still owe £2.50 to BT for a phone bill, to owing £55,000 to HMRC, all of this lot. You could have £1 million sat there, but it will list all of your debts and everything that you owe. And you can be prosecuted big style if there is mistakes in that document. So that's why you have to use an insolvency practitioner, because they go through everything with a fine tooth comb, everything. So some of the other things that I discovered is as soon as you appoint an insolvency practitioner, you pick a date. So they'll go through all the paperwork, do all the signing, everything, and then you pick a date. And that's the date that effectively your business enters into a member's voluntary liquidation. At that point, the insolvency practitioner takes over your bank account. Okay, so you have no control over your bank accounts anymore. The insolvency practitioner does. Now, they can, at that point, if you've got money, so they've done all of your list of your assets and what you owe. So if you've got money left over, they will make a declaration to you. So effectively, they'll say, you've got 100 grand in the bank. We'll give you 75. Here you are, write you a check. And they'll hold back 25 to cover costs and anything else, and anybody who might come and claim, for example. Then they give it so long to resolve all of this. It goes into the Gazette, it goes on to Companies House, people can come forward and make claims against your business, all of this sort of stuff. And eventually, once enough time has lapsed, they'll then say, right, we've paid everybody out, all of your accounts have now been closed, everything's been sorted, there's 13,320 quid left, here's a check and you can have it. Okay, so you don't, from that day forward, you don't control your own business anymore. Okay, the insolvency practitioner does, and they will pay out and take, claims for money and all of that type of stuff. So again, where you think you've made a nice living and it's all there ready for you to just draw down on, it isn't. Okay, and they also say, so firstly, you have to pay these guys anywhere, typically for most companies, between £5,000 and £20,000. The average is going to be somewhere around 10 by the time you've paid for all the disbursements. So they charge you for an article in the Gazette, they charge you for any letters they write, they charge you for handling your bank account, they charge you for putting the documentation on Companies House. It's like solicitors, there's just disbursements here, there, every year, Mark.
would you not be better off just taking everything out the year before, getting yourself down to minus 25, less than 25,000, and then doing that the following year?
Absolutely fine if you don't mind paying 34% tax on it.
I'd probably do that rather than do without crap. Sorry, but
well, it's really, you know what? It's really interesting. Firstly, it's going to come down to the numbers. Yeah. So if you've got 2 million quid sat in your account, 10% entrepreneurs relief sounds really attractive. Yeah. If you've got 100 grand sat in your account at the end of it, to be honest, you'd probably just take it out as dividends and then get struck off, or just wind your company down and then eventually dissolve it. So completely agree with you. It will depend on the numbers, but that's the whole point to this, is that if your accountant, so remember what I said, begin with the end in mind. So if you think I might retire in the next, let's say 10 years, and you've built up a nice pot of cash in your company, I would seriously start thinking about very early on, how can I start taking some of that money out of the company tax effectively, that is going to leave me with not a big pot of cash there, that making these decisions becomes even harder. Because if you've got a big pot of cash,
pension, but if you put yourself as a director, you could give yourself a pension of maybe 60,000, 80,000 pounds a year, and then that moves towards your pension. The business is paying for your pension, it's giving you extra tax relief, and then you're siphoning the money out for your benefit at a later stage and just wind it down.
I completely agree, but it all depends on how old you are, how much money you need to live off, what your other plans are. You know, if you've got a double-edged sword there. If you're 60 or 65, let's say, there's not a massive incentive to put your money into a pension, because you're not going to have the time for the growth.
Then you start, Mark. I've got enough trouble with Ash, haven't I? You picking on me.
So you've got the issue there that if you're too young, then you might be thinking, well, I need to live off that money now. If I go and put it, you know, we've put huge amounts into pensions because we were going to get some commercial property and this type of thing as a way around it. But if you're too young, you might be thinking, well, I've got to live off that money. I've got to take that money. If you're older, not saying too old, but if you're older, pensions become less of an incentive because you just don't have the growth from them. If you're into your 60s or 70s.
But at the same time, if you're looking at getting out of the business and taking as much out of it as you can and paying as less amount of tax, then if you're looking 5 or 10 years ahead, it could be worthwhile doing that.
Absolutely, I'm not knocking the idea, but don't forget as well, once it goes into that pension, that's it. It's lost.
Oh yeah, you're not getting it until
exactly. So, and if you need to live off that, you know, I've just turned 53. So for me,
me too.
It's
how do you look about 10 years older though, Mark?
Really, Mark?
Only 10. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Tough paper round.
I'll take that. So at 53, it was, am I going to get enough benefit from a pension? But secondly, if it's going to be 20 years before I can go and tap into that, what am I going to do for the next 20 years that I need to live off that money? So it is a balancing act, but the whole point to this is not, you know, I'm not here as an advisor. I'm here to raise the points that I've come across when I've come to close my company, that I hope will have people thinking about it far earlier than I did. Because I thought I was being fairly savvy and planning this 5 years ahead. It wasn't until we came to actually do the dirty deed that I realised all of the implications around physically closing the company, and what the implications are for that. So if now the other things to bear in mind is, as I said, it's very public, your statement of assets and all of this sort of stuff, advert in the Gazette. The other thing to bear in mind, us as mortgage advisors, and again thinking about both yourselves and clients, there are lenders out there that if the directors have ever had a liquidated company, irrespective of whether it was solvent, it's still regarded as a liquidated company, they will not lend. Yeah, it doesn't matter what the reasons are. If you have been a director of a liquidated company, they will not lend. And we all know as mortgage brokers that having lenders that won't lend to you, even though you've got a big pot of lenders to choose from, is not a great position to be in. So again, depends on your age, depends if you need a mortgage. None of us knows what's around the corner, but it is just something to consider, that if your only way to get your money out of your company is to do a members voluntary liquidation, you could well be screwing yourself for future credit.
Just like wondering and talking out loud a little bit. Like the big sticking point in this is obviously you wanted to shut your limited company. So there's the other option that you stay on the directorship for a period of time. Whoever you're selling your company to steps in, and then you remove your directorship later on, so that limited company doesn't shut.
Yeah, the issue with that one is back to what I said, which is the same as selling the company, is that the liability stays. So a lot of people, if they actually considered it, so a lot of people will be buying limited companies and not considering it. But if they do, and they've got a good advisor, the advisor would be saying to them, whatever you do, do not take on the limited company, because you're taking on the liability.
Yeah, okay.
And that was what we did. We split it because we've got the brand and everything. It doesn't need to come with the limited company. So we thought, separate the limited company from the brand and everything, sell the brand and the lot, and then the limited company we can just close. But there's two issues there. One, we don't lose the liability, because that's the first thing that I said, which is it still sticks around. The second thing is how you then physically close the company to get the money out of it.
So difficult, isn't it? Because I know that we joined a network with not thinking about any of this stuff at all, and then one of the first things they said to us once we joined is, "Oh, we're going to want to buy your business." And I think a lot of networks are going to move into that and owning client banks and stuff like that. So you definitely do need to think of this stuff. And it's great that exit at some point, but what am I?
If they're happy to take on the liability, which a network probably would, because in the scheme of things, you're probably quite small in terms of the liability they've got anyway, then that's a great option. But you also need to then consider how you're going to get the money out of it. So what typically happens with, if they buy the limited company, is, let's say your business has got £500,000 in it. What they actually do is, your business as a limited company is like a box, yeah, and everything is within that box. Your brand, your goodwill, your website, your office desks, your computers, everything sits within that box, including the money that's technically yours. Okay, so assuming that you don't, like Mark said, or Simon said, just draw it all out and pay your dividends on it, and you leave it within the box. What happens is if that business has got 500 grand in it, plus all of your assets and your goodwill and everything, let's say that comes to another 500 grand, let's just say, so it's worth £1 million. What they would do is they would pay £1 million for the box. Okay, so they've now got the box with the goodwill, the assets, everything in it. You've got your £1 million, including your 500 out of it. Okay, and then you pay your tax on that, and then hopefully you would claim entrepreneurs relief at that point. So then you would pay your 10%. So that was exactly what we intended to do. Yeah, was to close the business, or if we could sell it as a whole. Now, interestingly, as an aside, we'd already agreed that we were going to do the brand and everything to my advisors and that, but not the company. But I actually got approached by a lot of people once word sort of got out that I was selling. And this was another thing that I wanted to say. There is a bit of a urban myth in the mortgage business that mortgage businesses aren't worth anything. Yeah. Ignore insurance, because we know that you've got, the drip and pipeline business and insurance. But there's an urban myth going around saying mortgage businesses aren't worth anything. And it is an urban myth, because that's not true. Firstly, if you've built a strong brand, people will pay for that without a doubt. There are definitely people that would buy a mortgage client bank. not just for PTs and future business and remortgage business, but if you haven't tapped into it, we never did insurance. We only ever did property loans, mortgages, secured loans, that type of thing, bridging. So we never ever did insurance. So I got approached by quite a few firms that wanted to tap into the client bank for insurance business, because we never had, and investment business and pensions and that type of thing. Also, interestingly, I got approached by a company who wanted to purely buy the limited company and nothing else. And they were happy to take on the liability only because they wanted the FCA license. Okay. So
hard to come by, are they these days?
Sorry?
They're that hard to come by, are they these days?
Exactly. It was, they weren't a small firm, it was a big firm. And due to various complications, they'd been told it would be 18 to 24 months for them to get their FCA license. So by buying an existing business, they didn't want the rest of the business, they'd got their own business. All they wanted was the FCA license. So I can't think who it was earlier who said about go on as a director and then get a new director and then come off. That was effectively, was it you, Mark? Yeah, that was effectively the plan, was that their directors would come in and then I would leave, and then they would have the limited company, they'd have the what do you call it, the persons thing, significant persons thing, and they would now have a limited company with the FCA license already in it. So there's a whole load of different options out there in selling a mortgage business, but whatever it, do not believe anybody who says a mortgage business has no value, and it is something that's purported a lot in the mortgage industry, and it is just not true.
Spread by financial advisor firms.
Sorry, Mark?
I think it's been spread by financial advisor firms
Very
who
probably.
Basically pensions and investments are the big thing. Actually, your mortgage business is worthless, but yeah, we'll take your business off you because we're
exactly and we'll give you £3.50 for it.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah, and the you know, I see also what I see is I've seen quite a few mortgage brokers who have, you know, put posts on groups and stuff and said, I'm thinking of getting out or selling or whatever. And I've seen people say, oh, your business is worth nothing, but I tell you what, I'll pay you on each mortgage we do in the future. Let me have your client bank. Do you know what I mean? And that's the best that you can hope for, is that we'll service your client bank and we'll pay you 50 quid each time we write a mortgage or whatever. I've built up quite a successful mortgage brokerage, and we've got a good reputation and we've got a strong brand. I was offered high 6 figures for my business in a box, okay, and I don't do insurance, no insurance whatsoever, okay. So don't let anybody tell you that a mortgage brokerage isn't worth money, because there's not only the business in a box, but you've got all these different elements. You know, you've got the company with the FCA license potentially, you've got brands, you've got client banks, you've got all sorts of things, and then the whole lot comes together in a box. So I thought the whole thing was very eye-opening. I mentioned about the FCA, I'll just come on to that as well. When you are going to close your business, you have to submit. Have any of you DA have used Connect, Gabriel? Done Gabriel returns? No? God, don't know what you're missing. So it's stay in a network. So
you've been sarcastic there, I take it.
Yeah, definitely. So if you're DA, you have to submit Gabriel returns on the FCA's own system, which is called Connect. It's straight out of the arc. It's just a god-awful system. When you deauthorize, you have to go on there and do a permission to deauthorize sort of thing, that effectively you're closing the business. They want war and peace on why you're closing the business. I'll tell you a little anecdote in a minute as to what the FCA are like, as if we don't know already. So you have to submit a request to deauthorize. Unbelievably, they can decline your request to deauthorize. what they are going to do if you flat refuse to write a mortgage is beyond me, but they can refuse. They will go over your application to deauthorise with a fine-tooth comb, come back and ask you any questions they've got. They ask you for everything, who your insolvency practitioner is, all about your client bank, all about your PI, what you're going to do with your clients. So you're going to write to them, you're going to contact them, how you're going to deal with closing your business, everything. You've got like a whole questionnaire to fill in. And then they put on the FCA register application to deauthorise. So that goes straight on there. So anybody who goes and looks at you, your timing on all of this is awful, really, because we've still got pipeline business going on. Because as we know, when you write a mortgage, it could be months before you actually get paid. Yeah. So we've got pipeline business going on, but we have to start all of this process because it all takes time. So within a day of me applying to the FCA to deauthorise, they put application to deauthorise on my FCA page. You can go and have a look at it and it says it at the top. If a client was looking at that who we're still dealing with, how is the client going to interpret that? But we have to do that because you have to start the process well in advance of actually finishing your business. And yet you've still got pipeline business because of the way this business works. So it's all very frustrating. And that was the other reason as well that I didn't like the idea of going down the members voluntary liquidation route, is that as soon as I press that button, our bank account gets suspended, the IP takes over the bank account, and it goes public that we've gone into liquidation. Well, with the best will in the world, if you saw a company was in liquidation, hand on heart, wouldn't you all think that company had gone bust?
Yeah.
You would, wouldn't you? Yeah. It could have £2 million worth of cash sat in the bank. It could have £10 million worth of cash sat in the bank. But that's the only way that you can close a company if you haven't sold it. Yeah, with that type of money. So people are going to be making assumptions about you and your business because it says that you've appointed an insolvency practitioner online. So it's things like that that I want to make people aware of. And as Mark said, you know, look at alternatives such as, am I just going to pay the higher rate of dividends? Am I going to stick my money into a pension or whatever? As a result of this, I'm just seeing whether there's any other bits before I tell you what we actually did. Yeah, can't sell a business. GDPR, client bank, that was the other thing I was going to raise. Very grey area. Something that you can do now to preempt this is to go and have a look at your terms of business. If your terms of business says things like, I will not sell, rent, give away, blah, 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 your name, then you can't do that. Yeah. So your client bank becomes, I won't say worthless, but you're going to have difficulties doing anything with it. But GDPR and client banks is a very, very grey area, but it's worth going and having a look and seeing what your terms of business says. And if it says anything like that, probably take it out. You can say, I'll protect your data, yeah, under GDPR rules, but there's no requirement for you not to say I wouldn't sell it, okay, because you're entitled to sell your business and what comes with it, yeah.
But
So
if you go DA or directly authorised, you have the option to do that with your terms of business. But if you're a network, then the likelihood is you wouldn't be allowed.
But it's worth checking and seeing what your network says.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah, in your terms of business, because it might not have it in there, in which case you're more sort of protected in a way than if it does. Or if it is in there, raise it with the network and say, well, what happens when I come to want to sell my business and it says X, Y, and Z in the terms of business that you've made me use? They are probably as unaware of this as anybody else, I would guess.
Yeah.
So as a result of all of this, we made the decision not to go into liquidation, basically. I have to say, it felt, even though we were going to probably end up paying more tax in the long run, I cannot tell you the relief that I felt once I made that decision that that was not the route that I was going to go down. And it was just the thought of everything being so public, and I don't necessarily need or want any more mortgages again and all of this sort of stuff, but I'm still a property investor and nobody knows what's around the corner. I might want to refinance some of my properties, that type of thing. And the last thing I wanted was having to explain to lenders each time, and mortgage brokers and that, I wasn't insolvent, it was a members voluntary liquidation, this is it, here's all my numbers again, blah, blah, blah. Just having that on there, which stays permanently, by the way.
Tarnishes your name, doesn't it? In a way.
Sorry?
It kind of tarnishes your name.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, for me, like, reputation is a really, really big thing. For me, it always has been. And people won't bother to try and understand it or to read it. You know, they'll pore over your statement of assets to have a nose, but they won't realise that actually you were solvent and this is the only way that you can close a company. I mean, I'm on a bit of a mission about it. I said I was going to contact my MP and all of this lot. I was quite disgusted, in all honesty, that you can build up a solvent company and your only way to close it, if you've got money in it, is to appoint an insolvency practitioner, you know, and to do a members voluntary liquidation, which can affect your finances, even though you've successfully built up a business and created a lot of cash in it. I was apoplectic basically in the meeting. The poor insolvency practitioner didn't know what I did in, because I was just like so angry, and I kept saying, it's not your fault, but I'm just really angry about this. So I said I was going to go on a bit of a mission now and try and change this, because I just think it's shocking. I really do. And as I say, this whole exercise I mentioned to Dan, and I've mentioned it to Ash, was getting this message out that I just don't think people realise, any limited company owner, but particularly mortgage brokers. And we have a double whammy because, as I said, we've got PI issues, we've got complaint issues, we've got pipeline business, we've got the FCA to deal with, or your network. All of these things compound the issue of closing down a business. So it's just making people aware of that. So what we decided to do in the end was not close the limited company. We're actually switching it back to a property company. And we are going to buy some of our properties from ourselves. So we decided not to do incorporation relief. We've got a big portfolio of properties, but for us, incorporation relief didn't make any sense to incorporate. But what we can do is, we wanted the grandkids to get some properties to inherit a sort of property each of the grandkids. And it makes it a lot easier if that's in a limited company, because you can give them shares and blah, blah, blah. So we've decided to combine the two exercises. So if we buy a couple of our properties from ourselves, yes, we'll have capital gains tax, yes, we'll have the stamp duty surcharge, but it's a way of getting some of our money out of the company because it's bought some assets. Yeah. So as long as we're prepared to pay the bit of tax that comes with it, use our capital gains tax allowance as much as we can, pay the stamp duty surcharge. Ironically, if we do a couple of properties at a time, we get some stamp duty relief because we've got the multi-dwellings relief. So we can use our capital gains tax allowance and the multi-dwellings relief to bring down the tax a little bit. But overall, there's a saving because we've pulled out money from the company to buy some assets that we don't have to pay. It's not dividends. The company has bought the assets. Yeah. So other than paying some capital gains tax and some stamp duty, we've actually pulled money out of the company almost tax-free by buying the assets from ourselves. So that's the way that we're going to get some money out of the company, and we'll leave some in there, and then we'll have unencumbered properties in the company. So we'll probably do some more property deals, and just use the company and do some deals in there. And I'm actually going against my grain, which is we'll have investment properties and trades in the same company. But having been through how we would close a company already, I wouldn't be using entrepreneurs relief anyway, because we're back to having to do a members voluntary liquidation and the whole thing starts again. So we may as well just do some trades and take out the dividends and take out a director's salary and stuff like that over the next few years. So
massive learning curve for them, Lisa.
Massive, yeah. And like I say, I genuinely thought I was relatively savvy where business and companies are concerned, but I've only ever closed companies before that we sort of dissolved. They were companies we didn't need anymore or whatever, and we just sort of like, you know, struck them off or dissolved them. And so I've never had to go through the exercise of having money tied up in a company and how I'm going to get it out. So the whole thing has been very, very eye-opening. But straight off, I just kept saying, brokers won't know this. They just will not know this. And I want to get that message out, you know, to just say to people, consider all of these things well in advance, because if it is like Mark says, things like, well, I'll put it into a pension, then that needs considering as early as possible, because it's no good doing it when you're 65. It's too late then. Yeah. If you're thinking, well, I'll take my dividends out and I'll take my £2,000 and then I'll take my 8.75% and then I'll, you know, take my director's salary. And I mean, from a company, I think a husband and wife sort of co-directors can earn about £75,000, £80,000 between them without tapping into the higher tax bracket. So if you were to, but it's no, if you've got £500,000 sat in your company and you think, right, I don't want to be a mortgage broker anymore, and I can quite comfortably live off 80 grand for the next 10 years or whatever, then you can see how you can drip feed that money out and not pay huge amounts of taxes. But we didn't think that. We just said, oh, we'll keep building up this money in the company, pay the 10% entrepreneurs relief, happy days, you know, and then we'll go off and travel. We just never even considered the liquidation and all of that and the impact of all of that lot, and the liability and everything. So we were halfway there, but hadn't considered the actual exit. So I just wanted to get the message across to people about it, and to hope that they just think a bit more in advance than we were unfortunate enough to do.
Surely accountants should be like letting people know more about this when they're helping people set up as limited, because
you know, I mean, our accountants, we've had our accountants for about 16, 17 years or something, and I would generally regard them as pretty proactive. They're really good, compared to some of the others that I've seen, which are generally shocking. However, I do find accountants and solicitors very similar in that they answer the questions that you put to them, rather than, and even when they are generally proactive, unless you specifically sit down with them, I find, and say, right, I'm thinking about closing my company in 5 years' time or 10 years' time or 20 years' time. What do you suggest I do now? And then they'll tell you everything about it. But the fact is most business owners probably don't think like that anyway, because we're all thinking grow, 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 grow. Right, that's it. I've had enough. I want out. Yeah, and that's the way most people think. And then it all hits you, or they make an assumption that if there's anything I need to know, my accountant will tell me. Only they don't. You know, until you sit down with them. And again, that's about this. It's if any of you guys go away and sit down with your accountant and say, I want to discuss how I'm going to exit my company, or go and have a chat with your network and say, I want to speak to somebody about how I'm going to get out of the mortgage business, how I'm going to get my money out of my business, then my job here is done, sort of thing. That's all I want people to do, is to think about that and to be more proactive, to thinking with the end in mind, begin with the end in mind, instead of doing what we, like I say, we started 5 years ago and thought we were being proactive, and our accountant knew what our plan was, but of course we were all leading towards folding the business and having the entrepreneurs relief. So that was all the discussions were about how we do it. Do they come in as shareholders? Do we then directors and then we leave, or do we want to close the company? So we had all of the discussions. But then when we got to the end of it, literally this year, we said, right, it's all happening now. And they went, okay, then now we need to appoint an insolvency practitioner. No, we're not going insolvent. No, I know you're not. you're doing a members voluntary liquidation. Yes, so why do we need an insolvency practitioner? Because that's what you have to do. And then that was it, can of worms opened.
Okay.
Is that yeah, well, that's, like you say, eye-opening for me. Even obviously I'm not a broker, but for me, I'm still a limited company owner now, and so it's still valid information for me, but yeah, especially for brokers. So
Definitely.
thank you, Lisa. And yeah, you've come from obviously just a place of serving, for giving some information, which is very much appreciated. So obviously those guys have took a lot from it, I'm sure, but other people will take it back. So yeah, hopefully a lot of people will see this and take it on board. So
no problems. Any questions or anything?
It's quite depressing, isn't it? It's blown my mind a little bit.
Everyone's just terrified.
What's the bloody point in it all? You know, it's just brutal.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and that's exactly how I felt. I just felt the whole thing was just like I say, I went from shock to horror to anger, that, you know, I'd built a company and then was being told that I've got to get an insolvency practitioner in and all of this sort of stuff, and then let alone how much it was all going to cost and all of this type of stuff. It was the whole thing was just really eye-opening. You know, even other things like when this one again, classic sort of accountants thing, where only when you're doing it do they sort of raise it, because they're just, even the most proactive accountants aren't really proactive, they're very reactive. But when you sell your business, so let's say you've sold your brand or your website or your client bank or whatever, that's money that the business has just made. So even if you're closing it down and claiming your 10% entrepreneurs relief, not before you've paid corporation tax. So you pay your corporation tax first on those sales that you've just achieved. So let's just say you sold your website for 100 grand and your goodwill for 200 grand and your office and your furniture and everything for 100 grand. So you've just made 400 grand. You pay your corporation tax on that first, and then you get the money out of the business under the 10% entrepreneurs relief. So you're not so you're not selling the business and paying your entrepreneurs relief on the money that you've got for your business. That's come in as an asset of the business first. You've paid your tax. Then by closing the business, you get your entrepreneurs relief. So, you know, even stuff like that took me by surprise. And in the end, you know, as I think it was Mark Anderson who said, like, you know, once you've worked out all of the costs and the taxes and everything else that you're paying, you then start to think, well, actually, I may as well. It's not 10% versus 33. It's 10% plus corporation tax plus all the costs and everything else versus the 33. So when you start out thinking, oh yeah, 10% entrepreneurs relief.
From Dan's S22 Ultra.
I mean, obviously you're going to pay corporation tax and then pay dividends tax anyway, so you've still got your corporation tax bill. But I didn't realise that you paid corporation tax on any of the assets and anything that you sell from the business, and then pay your entrepreneurs relief on top of that. So that will take me by surprise as well.
It would do.
Well, thanks for that, Lisa. Actually, I wasn't aware of quite a bit of that myself either.
Good. And that's the whole point. That's what I said to Dan and to Ash, was about getting that message across, you know. So I still care very deeply about the industry and you know, the people that are within it. I'm not going anywhere. And if I can get that message across to people, then, you know, that's the main thing. If I can stop, you know, I just want any business owner, but particularly mortgage brokers, to just have that end in mind and think about this stuff as early as possible, rather than get there and then go, shit. I wish I'd known this before. Wish I was on that webinar with Dan and Lisa.
Cool. Thank you, Lisa, very much. Before we wrap up, has anybody else got anything else they want to ask Lisa? Or if they do, can they get in touch with Lisa on email or whatever?
Yeah, no problem. If you just go to my website, which is my name, lisaorme.com. I'm doing all this social media stuff with various plans we've got going on in the background. But in the meantime, I am doing consulting for property investors and mortgage brokers. So I've got a number of mortgage broker clients. We do everything from a sort of 90-minute Zoom call consultancy just to sort of like pick my brains type thing or talk about any particular topic or whatever, through to I do a whole sort of broker blueprint 3-month type program. And then we've got various packages and stuff that is basically all the stuff that I've collated over the years, the admin, paperwork, social media, marketing, you know, a training package, all sorts of stuff. So if you just go to my website and click on the consultancy bit, and you'll see there, and there's a free mortgage advisor strategy document you can go and get as well, like 10 tips for mortgage brokers, and that is just free. So feel free to go and help yourself.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll put a link to it as well, but because we'll obviously post this in the group for other people, so we'll put a link to your website on there as well. So
Brilliant, thank you.
Directly. But yeah, nice one. Thank you very much, Lisa. Much appreciated.
No problem, thank you.
Yeah, enjoyed that. Right, thank you very much, guys.
Everyone's just terrified. So.
Yeah, I know, just scared you all to death. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a good thing to have it noted in your head, isn't it? Because it needs to be. Yeah, we need to take on that fear. But yeah, thank you again, Lisa.
Definitely. I wish it was all stuff that somebody had told me, put it like that. So yeah, I think that's the main thing. I wish I'd been told by another mortgage broker, you need to consider all these things. Yeah. So if I can do that for somebody else, then that's a good thing.
Big time. Appreciate it, Lisa.
No
Dan and
problem.
Ross, do you want to stay on at the end just to know what we're doing next week? Because I don't actually know what we're doing.
Yeah, can do it.
Only if we have to.
Just so we know what we're doing.
All right, take care all. Take care.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.